Grand Admiral Kazak stood before the holographic displays aboard the Zexkari command ship Inevitable Victory, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he watched 12 synchronized abduction operations unfold across human space. The quantum scopes provided crystal-clear footage from each location, a technological marvel that these primitives couldn't hope to detect, let alone counter. Target 1 is secured, came the first report. The screen showed 8-year-old Emma Thompson vanishing from her bed in the New Seattle colony, her stuffed astronaut still clutched tightly in her small hands. The child didn't even wake during the molecular transport. Target 2 confirmed. This time it was David Martinez, 10 years old, son of a Jupiter station engineer. The boy had fallen asleep reading some primitive paper book about space exploration. How quaint. One by one, the reports continued. Sophie Anderson from Mars Colony Delta. The Wright twins from Europa Station. Each extraction executed with clinical precision, leaving nothing but rustled bedsheets and worried motion sensors that would soon alert their primitive human security systems. Kazak allowed himself a small smile, his facial scales shifting to display the deep blue of satisfaction. 12 children, 12 colonies, and not a single detection. Excellent work, strike teams. Behind him, Sub-Commander Vexley checked the final readings on her datapad. All subjects are safely contained in their stasis chambers, Admiral. Vital signs are stable, and the neural suppressors are maintaining their sleep state. Perfect. Kazak turned to face his bridge crew, noting their mixed expressions. Some showed the blue of satisfaction, others the gray of uncertainty. You seem troubled, Sub-Commander. Vexley's scales flickered briefly with the purple of concern. Admiral, are we certain this is the wisest course of action? The Meridian reports suggest humans are unusually protective of their offspring. Kazak waved a dismissive hand. The Meridians are notorious worry scales. Look at the humans' level of technology. Chemical rockets, basic genetic engineering, primitive AI systems. They've barely achieved basic interplanetary travel. Their military vessels still use nuclear fission. For Star's sake, he strode to the central command platform, activating the main communications array. Besides, what parent wouldn't surrender a few resource-rich worlds to save their child? We're offering them a remarkably generous deal, all things considered. The bridge crew watched as their admiral began recording the message that would soon be transmitted to Earth's united colonial government. His scales shifted to the deep red of authority, his voice resonating with practiced diplomatic precision. To the leaders of Earth and her colonies, the Zexkari Dominion has claimed custody of 12 of your offspring. Their safety and comfort will be assured, provided you comply with our reasonable demands. We require immediate mining rights to your outer colony worlds, specifically those orbiting Proxima Centauri, Ta Ceti, and Wolf 359. Additionally, your species will acknowledge Zexkari authority over all unclaimed systems within 50 light-years of your current territories. Kazak paused for dramatic effect, exactly as he practiced. You have 24 Earth hours to begin the transfer of authority. Upon confirmation of surrender, your children will be returned unharmed. Should you refuse, he let the threat hang in the air, knowing that no species would risk calling such a bluff. As the message concluded, Junior Tactical Officer Rezki approached with a datapad. Admiral, I've taken the liberty of preparing preliminary occupation plans for the human colonies. Their resource extraction operations are primitive but functional. We should be able to increase efficiency by at least 300% once we upgrade their equipment. Excellent initiative, officer. Kazak studied the plans with approval. Have the diplomatic corps prepare the surrender documents. I want everything ready when the humans inevitably contact us to negotiate. He returned to the viewport, watching as Earth's image slowly rotated on the main screen. Such a blue world, so rich in resources, populated by such a technologically backward species. This would be the easiest conquest of his career. Admiral. Vexley spoke up again, her scales still showing traces of purple concern. What if the Meridian reports about human protective instincts are accurate? Kazak's scales rippled with the yellow of amusement. Sub-Commander, they use projectile weapons and wear cloth armor. What's the worst they could possibly do? In the holding cells far below, 12 children slept peacefully, unaware that they had just become the catalyst for the Zexcari Dominion's greatest mistake. Ambassador Jessica Sullivan's diplomatic credentials clattered across the polished floor of the Zexcari High Command as she burst through the security checkpoint. 2 guards moved to intercept her, their scales flickering with alarmed orange patterns, but her Meridian Confederation authorization made them hesitate just long enough. "I need to speak with Grand Admiral Kazaks," she demanded, her usually perfect diplomatic composure shattered. "Now, before it's too late." High Commander Ixtel emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. His scales shifted through patterns of annoyance and curiosity as he regarded the human ambassador. "The Admiral is occupied with an ongoing military operation, Ambassador Sullivan. Perhaps you could schedule a proper appointment." "Those children," Jessica's voice cracked. "You took human children." The High Commander's scales rippled with yellow amusement. "Ah, you've heard of our leverage acquisition. Rest assured, the younglings are being treated well. Once their parents' colonies submit to our authority." "Submit?" Jessica laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. "You actually think?" She pulled out her datapad with trembling hands. "Computer, display historical file HX 279, the Chicago school incident." The holographic display sprang to life in the center of the room. Footage showed an attempted terrorist takeover of a school on Earth, decades ago. The Zexcari officers watched with mild interest as the scene unfolded. "Notice the response time," Jessica pointed. "From first alarm to total neutralization. 8 minutes. The parents broke through police barriers, military cordons, and 3 feet of reinforced concrete. 2 fathers with no military training disabled an automated security system. A kindergarten teacher disarmed 3 armed men with nothing but a chair and what humans call maternal rage." High Commander Ixtel's scales flickered with dismissive blue. "A primitive planetary incident, hardly relevant to." "Computer, display Mars colony siege," Jessica cut him off. The footage changed to show desperate aliens holding a colonial school hostage. The parents didn't wait for the military. They commandeered mining equipment, breached the dome in homemade pressure suits, and she gestured to the chaos that followed. "That was 50 years ago," Ixtel countered, "against a minor species with limited." Jupiter Station. Another display. Proxima Colony. Another. The Titan Incident. The images began to blur together, parents performing impossible feats to reach their children, overwhelming forces that should have stopped them, succeeding against astronomical odds. "You don't understand." Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper. "Humans have a saying, 'God have mercy on those who harm our children, because we won't.' It's not just words. It's written into their DNA. Every time someone has threatened human children, they've triggered something primal." A junior officer spoke up, his scales showing genuine concern for the first time. "But we've studied their military capabilities. Their ships are primitive, their weapons outdated. Because they've been hiding them." Jessica slammed her hand on the desk. "Computer, display classified file. Project Parent." The hologram showed glimpses of advanced technology, powered armor, neural interfaces, weapons that shouldn't have been possible with humanity's known tech level. After the Mars colony siege, Earth's governments began preparing. Every parent in every colony has access to emergency protocols, hidden catches, and technology you haven't seen. They've been ready, waiting for something like this to happen again. High Commander Ixtel's scales had lost some of their confident blue. "Even if what you say is true, we hold their offspring. They cannot risk." "Risk." Jessica pulled up one final file. "This is what happened to the last species that took human children. They were called the Cretal. Notice how I say were. The footage that played made several officers' scales turn pale gray with horror. When it finished, silence filled the chamber. "Release them," Jessica pleaded. "Release them now, while you still can, before the parents realize their children are missing. Before they know it was you." A message prompt flashed on the main screen. "Human Colonial Government Receiving Transmission from Grand Admiral KZX." Jessica's shoulders slumped. "You're actually going through with it. You're going to demand their surrender." "The operation is already in motion," Ixtel stated, though his scales now showed traces of uncertainty. "The Admiral has committed our forces." "Then understand this." Jessica headed for the door, her voice heavy with resignation. "What's coming isn't a war. It's not even revenge. You're about to experience what happens when you threaten the children of a species that evolved as protective parents on a death world. We have a term for it. Mama Bear Syndrome." She paused at the threshold. "And you just poked 12 of them." 23 hours and 47 minutes after broadcasting their demands, the Zexcari Command Center remained unnaturally quiet. No desperate transmissions, no frantic negotiations, no plaintive pleas for mercy. Just silence. Junior Communications Officer Mexter's scales flickered with nervous green as she reviewed the readings for the 5th time. "Admiral, we're confirming signal receipt at all major human colonial installations. They've definitely received our message." Grand Admiral Kazax drummed his clawed fingers against his command chair. "And yet they haven't responded." Curious, he turned to his tactical display. "Show me human fleet movements in the past hour." The holographic map flickered to life, and Kazax's scales shifted to a puzzled gray. Across human space, ships were going dark. Not in panic or chaos, but with methodical precision. "Sir," Tactical Officer Rezki called out, "the human destroyer US Valley Forge just vanished from its patrol route near Proxima Centauri." Vanished. Kazax's scales rippled. "Explain." "It powered down its transponder, sir. But before it did, its last recorded vector was..." Rezki's scales paled. "Directly toward Zexcari space." Similar reports began flooding in. The U.S. Thunderchill disappeared from its mining protection detail. The U.S. Maternal Instinct, an oddly named vessel that had been observing Zexcari border movements, simply winked out of existence. Each ship's last known trajectory pointed like an arrow toward Zexcari territory. Sub-Commander Vexley approached with a datapad, her scales showing clear concern. "Admiral, it's not just military vessels. Human merchant ships are going dark. Trading posts are powering down. Colonial defense platforms are switching to autonomous mode. It's like they're..." She searched for the word. "Preparing." Kazax finished, his own scales beginning to show traces of worry. "Show me the human civilian channels." The communications array crackled to life, but instead of panic, they heard snippets of eerily calm conversations. "Remember what we practiced. Time to open the red-sealed orders. Protocol Mama Bear is in effect." On the main viewer, Ambassador Sullivan's ship appeared, broadcasting on an open channel. The Meridian vessel was already turning away from Zexcari space, its engines glowing hot with emergency acceleration. "This is your final warning, Admiral Kazax." Sullivan's voice was heavy with resignation. "Release them now." Before. Suddenly, alerts blared across the command center. Mexter's scales turned almost white. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from human space. They're colonies. They're activating something." The tactical display showed power readings soaring across human territory. Hidden installations were coming online. Dormant defense systems were awakening. Sensor stations detected enormous energy signatures emerging from what they'd thought were simple mining operations. "Impossible," Kazax whispered. "Their technology level. They couldn't have hidden." "Admiral," Rezki interrupted, his voice shaking. "We're losing contact with our outer monitoring posts. One by one, they're just going silent." Kazakh stared at the tactical display as another human vessel, the U.S. never threatened our children, disappeared from its patrol route. Its last known coordinates pointed directly at the Zexkari core worlds. "Send word to High Command," he ordered. "Tell them." "Sir." Mexter's scales were practically glowing with panic. "Priority message from Research Station 9. They report the human children are laughing." "Laughing?" "Yes, sir. They've begun telling stories to each other." "Stories about?" Her scales rippled with disbelief. "About what happened to the last aliens who tried taking human children." In the silence that followed, Ambassador Sullivan's final transmission echoed through the command center. "You should have listened." Kazakhs watched as another human ship vanished from sensors, its last vector aimed at his fleet's position. For the first time in his career, his scales showed the deep purple of genuine fear. They had expected negotiations. They had prepared for tears, for begging, for desperate offers of submission. They hadn't prepared for this cold, methodical silence. They hadn't prepared for the laughter of children who knew what was coming. And they certainly hadn't prepared for the realization that humanity's technological limitations had been the galaxy's longest-running deception. Colonel James Walker moved like a ghost through the corridors of Research Station 9, his quantum phase armor rendering him nearly invisible to Zexkari sensors. The station's security systems registered nothing more than occasional power fluctuations. By the time they recognized the pattern, it would be far too late. "Emma's signal is 3 levels down," his wife Catherine's voice whispered through their neural link. She was approaching from the opposite side of the station, her own experimental combat systems humming quietly. "How's their security looking?" James paused at an intersection, letting his augmented reality display analyze the patrol patterns. "Primitive. They'd really bought our low-tech act. They're still using basic motion sensors and heat detection." "Their mistake," Catherine's voice held the Predator's calm. "Michael, how's the system infiltration going?" In the station's data core, Michael Rodriguez's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, his neural implants connecting directly with the Zexkari network. Technology that the aliens thought humanity was decades away from perfecting. "I'm in their security grid," Michael reported, his voice cold. "They took Sophie, my little girl. They're about to learn why I spent 15 years designing these cyber warfare systems." The station's lights flickered. Doors began opening and closing randomly. Security cameras switched to loops of empty corridors. The Zexkari guard scales shifted to alarmed orange as their communications began failing. "What's happening?" Security Chief Nexven demanded, his scales now showing patches of worried gray. "Report." "Unknown malfunctions across multiple systems," a technician responded, her own scales paling. "It's like something's inside our network, but the humans couldn't possibly." The main screen crackled to life, showing footage from Earth's historical archives, scenes of human parents protecting their young. A mother lifting a ground car to save her trapped child. A father fighting off multiple armed attackers to defend his family. Each clip ended with the same message: "You should have asked about our hidden capabilities." In the command center, Nexven's scales turned almost white as the security feeds began showing current footage. A shadow moving too fast for cameras to track, leaving unconscious guards in its wake. A figure walking through solid walls as if they were mist. And most terrifying of all, the calm, methodical way these intruders were dismantling his station's defenses. "Lock down the prisoner section," he ordered. "Activate all combat drones. Send word to." The station's power grid went dark. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the corridors as backup systems engage. "Security breach in Sector 7. Someone shouted. "No, Sector 3. They're everywhere." Through the chaos, Michael's voice remained steady in the neural network. "Catherine, James, I've locked down their weapon systems. They're running on minimal power. Amanda's team is approaching from the lower levels. We got them surrounded." In his command center, Nexven watched in horror as one by one, his security teams went silent. not with screams or sounds of battle, but simply stopped reporting. The intruders were ghosting through his defenses like they didn't exist. "Impossible," he whispered, scales showing pure terror. "Their technology level, all our intelligence said." "Your intelligence was wrong." A voice spoke from the shadows. James Walker stepped into view, his quantum phase armor shifting from invisible to a predatory matte black. "We've been hiding our true capabilities for decades. Preparing. Waiting. For what?" Nexvan backed away, his scales rippling with fear. "For someone stupid enough to threaten our children." The last thing Nexvan saw was Catherine Walker emerging through a solid wall behind him, her armor's neural disruptors already activated. As consciousness faded, he heard her cold voice. "The children are 2 levels down. All teams converge. And someone make sure to record this. The other alien species need to understand exactly why you never, ever take human children." In their holding cells, the 12 children heard the subtle sounds of their parents' approach. None of them showed surprise or fear. Instead, young Emma Thompson smiled as she hugged her stuffed astronaut. "They really shouldn't have taken us," she said calmly to her fellow captives. "Mom and Dad always said humans have been hiding their best technology, keeping it ready." "Ready for what?" one of the Zexcari guards demanded. Emma's smile grew wider as the cell block's lights began to fail. For this, Guard Captain Texelor had overseen many prison facilities during his career, but none had unsettled him quite like this one. The 12 human children weren't acting like any hostages he'd ever encountered. No crying, no begging, no signs of trauma. Instead, they'd organized themselves into what they called a study group. And that's why the Cretal Dominion doesn't exist anymore. 10-year-old David Martinez explained to the younger children, sketching diagrams in the air with his finger. "My mom says they made the same mistake you guys did. They thought taking kids would be a good bargaining chip. That's enough." Texlor's scales flickered with agitation. "Stop spreading these stories." 6-year-old Sophie Anderson looked up from her drawing, a surprisingly detailed sketch of what appeared to be advanced combat armor. "They're not stories, though. They're history lessons, very important ones." She returned to her drawing, adding what looked suspiciously like weapon systems to the armor's shoulders. In the corner, the Wright twins were leading the younger children in some sort of counting game. But instead of normal numbers, they were counting down patrol intervals between guard shifts. Their accuracy was disturbing. "You know what I don't understand?" Ryan O'Connor spoke up, his 12-year-old voice carrying an unsettling maturity. "Why nobody told them about Protocol Mama Bear? Seems like something important to mention during first contact." Texlor's scales shifted to a nervous green. What protocol?" "Oh, you'll find out soon." Ryan smiled, then turned to Emma Thompson. "Hey Emma, wasn't your mom one of the designers of the quantum phase armor?" Emma nodded, still clutching her stuffed astronaut. "Yep. She tests new models every weekend. Dad says she's the best at walking through walls." She looked directly at Texlor. "Your walls, specifically." The guard captain's scales paled. He activated his comm unit. "Central, request immediate reinforcement of containment field generators, and run another scan for approaching vessels." "Still nothing on scans," Central replied. "No ships within detection range." "That's because they don't need ships," David explained helpfully. "Not for this type of rescue. Mom says that's why we developed personal teleportation tech. The Cretal taught us to have backup plans for reaching our kids." A younger guard, Vixmar, entered the holding area. His scales showed clear distress. "Sir, we're getting strange power fluctuations throughout the station, and the human children in Block C are singing. Some kind of old Earth song, about mothers searching for their children." Sophie looked up from her drawing again. "Oh, that's probably You Are My Sunshine. It's Mom's favorite. She used to sing it to me every night." She tilted her head as if listening. "The power fluctuations mean they're almost here. The quantum drives make the lights do funny things." As if on cue, The lights flickered. Texlor's scales rippled with fear as he remembered the briefing about human parent-child bonds, about their supposedly primitive but inexplicably effective rescue operations. Central, respond. He barked into his comm. Only static answered. Dad's probably in your systems by now, Ryan commented. He's really good at that. Says the best way to protect kids is to make sure the bad guys can't call for help. The holding cell's force field wavered. Emma hugged her stuffed astronaut tighter, but her smile never faltered. They're here, she announced calmly. Who's here? Vixmar demanded, his scales now showing pure terror. Our parents. Emma's voice carried absolute certainty. And you have no idea what you've started. The lights failed completely, plunging the holding area into darkness. Emergency systems sputtered, casting an eerie red glow through the corridors. In the distance, they heard the distinct sound of security doors being breached. Last chance, David offered, almost sympathetically. You might want to surrender now. It'll go better for you than it did for the Cretal. Texlor's scales shifted through patterns of fear as he realized the truth. These weren't prisoners trying to scare their captors. These were children absolutely certain of their rescue, calmly watching their captors realize the magnitude of their mistake. As the sounds of systematic infiltration grew closer, Sophie returned to her drawing, adding one final detail to the combat armor sketch, a small note in the corner that read, Mom's Rescue Suit, version 8.2. Don't worry, she told her fellow captives. This will make a great show-and-tell story when we get home. The Zexkari High Command's tactical display showed their military infrastructure collapsing with terrifying precision. Not through massive fleet battles or overwhelming forces, but through small, unstoppable teams of human parents systematically dismantling everything they'd built. Status report on Research Station 7, High Commander Ixtel demanded, his scales shifting between fear gray and confusion purple. Gone dark, sir, the tactical officer responded, trying to keep his own scales from showing terror. Like the others, last transmission mentioned something about a school teacher breaching their quantum shields. A school teacher? Ixtel's scales rippled in disbelief. How did a primitive educator? Major Elizabeth Parker. Ambassador Sullivan's voice cut through the command center as she appeared on the main screen. Former colony teacher, mother of twins. She also happens to hold 6 patents on quantum shield disruption technology. You should have done better research. The display showed footage of a single human figure, wrapped in advanced combat armor, methodically disabling defenses that should have been impenetrable. The Zexkari watched in horror as she moved with impossible speed, her movements suggesting both military training and maternal fury. Tracking multiple breaches in sectors 4 through 7, another officer reported. It's Thomas Wright, the mining colony supervisor. The what? Ixtel's scales paled further. That's his cover job, Sullivan explained, her voice heavy with resignation. His actual role is head of special operations, Colonial Defense Force. Those primitive mining tools you ignored. They're capable of cutting through battleship armor, which he's currently demonstrating on your outer facilities. The tactical display updated, showing more human parents advancing through Zexkari space. Each one moved with the same terrifying combination of military precision and parental determination. How? Ixtel demanded. Our intelligence said your technology was decades behind ours. Your ships use nuclear fission. Your colonies barely have artificial gravity. Because we learned from the Cretal incident, Sullivan interrupted. After they took human children, Earth's governments realized we needed 2 things: better defenses and better deception. Every parent in every colony has access to technology we've kept hidden. Every primitive facility has quantum-sealed caches of advanced weapons, those outdated chips. They're packed with systems you haven't even theorized yet. On the screen, they watched Catherine Thompson, CEO of what they'd thought was a small colonial computing firm, systematically disable an entire defense platform's AI network. Her neural interfaces worked at speeds the Zexcari had thought impossible for human minds to achieve. Central Command reports critical systems failing. An officer called out, his scales now pure terror white. They say the humans are inside their quantum firewalls. They're not just breaking through our defenses, they're taking them apart to see how they work. Of course they are. Sullivan nodded. Those are the scientists whose children you took. People who've spent decades developing technologies while pretending to be far less advanced than we are, and you just gave them personal motivation to show their full capabilities. The tactical display showed another facility going dark. The human responsible had been listed in their intelligence reports as Amanda Cooper, agricultural specialist. She develops experimental combat stimulants, Sullivan explained. The kind that let a parent lift a ground car off their child. Your facility's structural integrity was rated against standard military forces. It wasn't rated against chemically enhanced parental instincts. Ixtel watched as his empire's most secure facilities fell one by one to what his intelligence had dismissed as primitive colonists. Why? He finally asked. Why hide all this? Because we remembered our own history. Sullivan's voice was soft. Every time a more advanced civilization encountered a less advanced one on Earth, it ended badly for someone. So when we reached the stars, we decided to appear harmless, primitive, not worth conquering or threatening. She gestured to the display showing more human parents advancing through Zexcari space. But you didn't just threaten us. You threatened our children. And now you're learning why every human colony has a cache of quantum weapons labeled Emergency Parental Response Kit. The lights in High Command flickered. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to sound. They're here, Sullivan said simply, and cut the transmission. In the ensuing silence, Ixtel watched his tactical display show another human parent breaching another impenetrable defense. Their intelligence had said humans were primitive. They hadn't said anything about what humans became when their children were in danger. Research Station 9's security cameras captured the moment Lysa Kennedy reached the first security barrier separating her from her son. The footage would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy, though few could believe what they were seeing. The barrier, 3 feet of quantum-reinforced alloy, was rated to withstand capital ship impacts. Lysa Kennedy tore through it like paper, her augmented muscles leaving hand-shaped dents in material designed to survive planetary bombardment. Her combat suit's sensors had locked onto her son's biosignature, and nothing in the known universe was going to stand between them. Security breach in Cell Block D, a Zexcari guard shouted, his scales showing pure terror white. She's not even using weapons. She's just going through everything. Through the station's failing security feeds, the Zexcari watched in horror as more parents reached their objectives. Christopher Barnes, whose file listed him as a colonial agriculture specialist, moved faster than their cameras could track. The image would blur, guards would fall unconscious, and another security checkpoint would fail. How are they doing this? Security Chief Nexvan demanded, his scales rippling with panic. Their species couldn't possibly. You really should have researched human medical documentation. Dr. Amanda Cooper's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, her neural infiltration of their communication system complete. Specifically, the phenomenon we call hysterical strength. Under normal circumstances, humans only use about 30% of our muscle capacity. Adrenaline can push that to 50%. But a parent trying to reach their child. She laughed darkly. We haven't found the upper limit yet. In Cell Block A, Catherine Thompson's quantum phase armor flickered as she stepped through the final wall separating her from Emma. The guard on duty barely had time to register the impossible sight before her neural disruptors put him to sleep. Mom. Emma didn't show a trace of surprise or relief, just pure vindication as she hugged her stuffed astronaut. Did you use the new Phase 7 protocols to get through their shields? Catherine smiled inside her armor as she scanned her daughter for injuries. Actually, sweetie, this was a good chance to test the Phase 8. Want to help me document the performance data when we get home?" Down the corridor, Michael Rodriguez had already reached Sophie's cell. The security footage showed him pausing only briefly to document the Zexcari's quantum encryption. Valuable intelligence for future reference. Sophie looked up from her detailed drawings of his combat armor with a bright smile. "Dad, I got all the weak points in their security system mapped out. Want to see?" Michael's voice carried equal parts parental pride and professional interest as he examined his daughter's surprisingly accurate technical drawings. "That's my girl, always turning a hostile situation into a research opportunity." The Wright twins' reunion with their father was equally surreal to the watching Zexcari. Thomas Wright breached the cell block's main control center with mining tools that were suddenly, terrifyingly more than simple industrial equipment. "Did you kids remember to count the guard patrol patterns like we practiced?" he asked while casually disassembling his secure quantum lock. "Every shift," the twins chorused. "We can recite them on the way home." Throughout the station, similar scenes played out. David Martinez calmly explained to his mother how he used his captivity to study Zexcari computer interfaces. Ryan O'Connor was already discussing potential improvements to his parents' stealth systems based on what he'd observed of the station's sensors. The children's behavior stunned their former captors more than the parents' impossible abilities. There were no tears, no trauma, no desperate reunions. Just the calm confidence of children who had never doubted their rescue, finally meeting parents who had never considered failure. "I told you they were coming," Emma said to the last conscious guard as her mother's armor shifted back into combat mode. "We tried to warn you. There's a reason the Criddle don't exist anymore." The guard's scales shifted to pure white as Catherine Thompson's voice carried the weight of every parent who had ever sought a missing child. For future reference, the correct response to "don't take our kids" is "we won't take your kids. Unfortunately for you, we'll have to make sure this lesson sticks." The last security feed showed the human families calmly walking out through walls that should have contained them, discussing their experience like it was nothing more than a field trip. The children were already turning the incident into an impromptu science lesson, comparing notes on Zexcari technology. The galaxy would soon learn what the Cretal had discovered too late. There is no force more unstoppable than human parents protecting their young. The emergency session of the Galactic Council stretched into its third hour as species after species watched the footage of human parents systematically dismantling the Zexcari military infrastructure. The chamber fell silent as the final video played. William Anderson, a simple colony farmer, using his supposedly primitive mining suit to punch through a battleship's hull to reach his daughter. To summarize, Ambassador Jessica Sullivan stood at the podium, her voice carrying no hint of satisfaction. The Zexcari Dominion abducted 12 human children. In response, 12 sets of parents demonstrated why humanity's apparent technological limitations were the galaxy's longest-running deception. The Zexcari representative scales showed the deep blue of shame. Grand Admiral Kazax, now stripped of his rank, could barely lift his eyes from the floor. "The humans request no reparations," Sullivan continued. "No territorial concessions, no technological transfers. Instead, we propose the establishment of a new interstellar law, the Parent Protocol." The chamber's holographic displays showed footage from the incident. Catherine Thompson walking through quantum-shielded walls, Michael Rodriguez dismantling impenetrable cybersecurity, Lisa Kennedy leaving handshake dents in battleship-grade alloys. All species considering hostile action against another civilization must first complete mandatory research into species-specific cultural triggers, Sullivan explained. Special emphasis will be placed on parent-child bonds and their military implications. From their observation pod, the 12 rescued children watched the proceedings with scholarly interest. Emma Thompson was already working on her school report, "How I Spent My Hostage Crisis," a study in synapsecology. Sophie Anderson's detailed technical drawings of Zexcari security systems had been classified as valuable intelligence. Furthermore, Sullivan continued, Humanity formally acknowledges that our technological capabilities significantly exceed previous declarations. We will be updating our official species profile to prevent future misunderstandings. The Meridian representative spoke up. Would you explain why humans maintain this deception? Simple survival, Sullivan replied. Earth's history taught us that when technologically advanced civilizations meet less advanced ones, the results are rarely pleasant for either side. So when we reached the stars, we decided to appear harmless, primitive, not worth conquering or threatening. She gestured to the footage still playing. We kept our best technology hidden, disguised as industrial equipment or colonial infrastructure. Every human colony has a quantum-sealed cache of advanced weapons. Every parent has access to combat systems that we developed after the Cretal incident. We call it the Mama Bear Protocol. Always be prepared to protect our young. The council chambers buzzed with discussion. Species across the galaxy were suddenly reevaluating their assessments of the supposedly primitive humans. But such deception, another representative began, was necessary, Sullivan interrupted. Until today, when the Zexkeri made the same mistake as the Cretal. They'd assumed that taking children would give them leverage. Instead, they gave us reason to reveal exactly how far humans will go to protect our offspring. In the observation pod, David Martinez raised his hand. Ambassador, can I show them my analysis of their quantum encryption? I think I found some interesting vulnerabilities during my captivity. Sullivan smiled. Perhaps later, David. For now, let's focus on the diplomatic aspects. The Galactic Council's final resolution was unanimous. The parent protocol became galactic law, requiring extensive cultural research before any hostile action. The Zexkeri incident entered academic curriculum across known space, taught alongside the cautionary tale of the now extinct Cretal. As the session concluded, the Council received an unexpected request. The children asked permission to present their field trip reports on Zexkeri technology, combat tactics, and xenopsychology. Their detailed observations, gathered while supposedly traumatized hostages, became classified intelligence documents. Later that evening, as human parents across the galaxy hugged their children a little tighter, Ambassador Sullivan received one final message from the Galactic Council. Updated species classification. Humans. Deceptively advanced, extraordinarily protective of offspring. Threat level. Do not antagonize, especially if you value your continued existence as a species. Sullivan smiled as she read the addendum. Note. Their children are even more dangerous. They take notes. In their homes across human space, 12 families settled back into normal life. Their children proudly displayed their surviving alien abduction merit badges, while their parents quietly restored their combat systems to hidden caches, ready if ever needed again. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Some species you don't threaten, and you never, ever take their children.